This is my childhood desk. Hang on. My parents have just moved house and they called me up and said, do you want your desk? First instinct, no, I've got a workbench. So what do you do next? I'm not going to throw it away. I'm not going to burn it, but I am going to turn it into something. That way I'll feel like the wood's going to a good cause. And this video is brought to you by Squarespace. So, first thing we need to do before we can do anything is to clear this space, because I'm going to need to work on it, and we've got to see what wood we've actually got inside this desk. So, hang fire, I'm going to get my biggest hammer, and we're going to take this thing apart. Right, let's see what we're working with. Let's work on this then. Now I confess, I've had a little dig through this and I've separated it into its bits. But here's the disappointing bit. Each of these plywood sheets was mounted into a groove on each of the legs. I know, I should have seen that. Each of the legs being in the corner has 2 of these grooves, which takes away from quite a lot of the usable wood. On top of that, all of the cross pieces are mortised and tenoned. Again, should have seen that. So in taking a lot of these bits out, we've created a little bit of damage and we've left holes behind. I do have some solid legs from where they didn't have to take one of the pieces of ply. One of the disappointed bits where they've screwed the skirts up into the tabletop, there's quite a big recess that's been made with a Forstner bit. Now before you start typing, I know this is how you make stuff. You've got to do this. I'm just saying I'm disappointed. So the first job I need to do is prep some of this wood. I need to take out all of the nails. I'm going to use my metal detector. I'm going to go over it all and then I'm going to show you what I've got and I'm going to clean some of it up too. Now another confession before we get started. I pulled this desk apart without really looking carefully enough at the joints, each one of which had a small nail through it where the tenon met the mortise. And it was these small nails that caused all the splintering when I did actually get the joints apart. And some had so many nails that it was easier just to chop that entire section away. The top, well, sadly that's useless for this project because these scratches, they go straight through the veneer. But with a little bit of sanding, I can use it as comparison to see what the shades of the wood are actually going to look like. And it seems like we might need to address those shade differences a little bit later. But from what I can tell, the solid wood is something like sapele. So it's got potential. And I am planning more than one project from this wood, but we're going to focus on one for this video. Well, provided there's enough good wood to actually make this piece first. The reason this is such an important piece is because I'm making it for my parents who have recently moved house. And as my old desk was in their previous house, well, it seemed fitting to make something for the new one. And they've given me free rein-ish. The only criteria really is that it's got to fit a router on the top. Not a router, a router for the internet. And it does feel genuinely quite nice to repurpose one piece of furniture that was never going to be used again into another piece that will be used. And then, like a kickback, I get to keep what's left. Oh, but there is one more issue. Furniture's not really something that I build all that often. And if I had to pick an area of woodworking that I have practiced the least, that's it. So this should be fun. Now, although the veneered top is ruined, the sides are still solid wood, so trim them off first. And then slice them a little bit thinner again. As I don't have the right style of push stick here that I need, and I'm trying to use the crown guard as much as possible, mainly for safety reasons, but also for other reasons, which I'm going to elaborate on in a minute, I just sliced as far through as I safely could, and then turned the saw off, removed the piece, and then cut the bit I needed loose. It's unconventional, but it felt safer than pushing the whole piece through. I took this piece back to the table saw to cut a rebate along its length. Now sadly, this cut can't be done with the crown guard on because it's not a full through cut. And if it feels safer to you doing it on a router table, follow your instincts. But always use a scrapwood and offcut to get the depth right before you go for your main piece. Then, once you've done the first cut and it's the right depth, you can turn the piece through 90 degrees and make the second cut. That's going to remove a slice along the corner and give you a rebate. This rebate's going to act kind of like a picture frame for the panel that we're going to cut to size, and then that's going to be the top of the table. But don't be me here. What I've done is made the panel fit perfectly flush with the edge pieces. Too flush, if that's a thing. In sanding the outer pieces to get a nice finish on them, I'm going to leave the panel proud, or end up sanding through the very thin veneer. But, and this is actually important if you're going to plan on making anything out of reclaimed timber. Well, there's 2 buts actually. First but, the wood will most likely be of lesser quality, or at least need more work than if you bought it specifically for the project. I mean, you will see during this that the wood is covered in marks, holes, old tenons, both filled and open. So the end result will be affected. Lean into that. Don't aim for pristine perfection. Give yourself a break. And second but, if like I experienced you make some cuts and there's just something about the smell or the taste of the dust, well, first of all, you shouldn't be smelling or tasting dust. But if it is different from what you are used to, take that extra level of care to protect yourself. This is another reason I try to use the crown guard as much as possible here. Not only is it a huge safety feature, but it also improves the dust extraction taken at the source. And you don't know what is really on this wood from years of wherever it's been and whatever it's been used for. So you're going to see me mask up for most of this build. Now, where do we get to? Oh yeah, the top. I wanted mitre joints for the outer frame, and the best way I know how here is to sneak up on the cut. And this is something that you're going to see more and more through the build. Multiple cuts to sneak up on a perfect fit. Not only that, but I'm going to be taking measurements from the piece itself as it comes together. No plans, no dimensions, I'm not cutting all the parts before assembling. Far easier and more of a flow in the build if you take referential measurements as you go. Quick tip, for those without specialist mitre clamps. If you find you're clamping this frame together and then under pressure, the joints are opening, there's a very good chance one of your pieces is a hair too long. Now it's tempting to take some sandpaper to the joint and sand the inside, but this is going to lead to nothing but frustration. It's next to impossible to not lose the right angle this way, and not to mention the flat face. Just shave a hair off with the mitre gauge and don't take too much off. And then sand as much as you can before the glue up so that later on you're not risking the veneer. Did anybody notice that I actually sanded for a few seconds without any sandpaper? Yeah, that happened. Now gluing this together is just like any picture frame or mitred box you might have done in the past. A straight edge and some painter's tape gets you good alignment and hold. And I don't mind saying this entire part took really quite a long time. If you imagine how long it would take to buy nice, neat, planed all round stock and then make a tabletop identical to this, I'd say a morning maximum. Well, not this way. Worth bearing that in mind before you enter into a project like this one. For me, sentimental value made my decisions. But genuinely, it's not like this wood was being used because it's particularly stunning, or rare, or even weathered into a nice patina. Anyway, Live Mark wants to talk again. There's a reason that I did this first, and I just wanted to come on and tell you that. Basically, this is the size of the space that I've been asked to make a piece for. This keeps me in line. I've got two legs that are the best shape out of any of the other legs. I've got two of what were the skirts. Now I'm going to slice these down the middle, and then I'm going to laminate them onto each other to cover these holes up. With all of this, I think I can make what I need. Before I start cutting, please let me take a minute to tell you about this week's video sponsor. You see, while making this table, it's got me thinking about how far I've come since, as a child, sitting at the original desk. And trust me, that was a long time before laptops and YouTube. I feel like since then I've learned so much, but equally, there's so much I haven't learned. And that's okay. That's where you let the experts do those things for you. Experts like Squarespace. It's a website to make a website. I can never hope to learn everything that I need to know to make a website from scratch. But I can design one and brand it. I can fill it with ideas, pictures, videos, and a ton of information. And I'm happy to leave the hard stuff to Squarespace. Stuff like ensuring that everyone who looks at the website is offered to join a mailing list, so I can keep them updated with offers and exciting news. Stuff like selling, teaching, managing payments, and subscriptions. And so much more. In truth, they've made it possible for me to have a website full stop. And if you want one too, simply visit squarespace.com for your free trial. Do what I did. Throw a few ideas in there and see what comes out. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/start making for 10% off your first purchase of a domain or website. And now, well, now we can do the cutting. Now, I honestly don't know how I'm going to hide all of the chunks missing out of these bits of wood, but we'll see. I took the time to cut the two good legs down to length simply by using a stop on my mitre gauge, and I really wanted to show you how accurate it was, but it was kind of proving tricky. I was scratching my head for a second until I realised that these legs weren't actually straight. This kind of goes with what I said earlier when I said don't expect perfection with recycled wood. Expect character. Lean into that. And in order to get the best seam possible for this glue up, I decided to plane the inner surfaces, which is actually also a great way of cleaning up this really grubby wood without making a load more dust. And as an aside here, clamps may actually be the thing I get asked about most. Well, apart from the Phil Collins thing. I don't know when that started or why. But for smaller builds, I have around 6 squeeze clamps and maybe 20 of these Jorgensen screw clamps. I didn't buy them all at once, they weren't given to me free, I wasn't gifted them. I bought 4 every time there was a Black Friday deal on Amazon or something similar. Now the squeeze clamps are great for an initial hold, but a lot of the screw clamps ensure a nice tight joint. And here is a really quick tip for fixing brakes like this. You don't want to just glue it and then just pop a clamp on it in the middle. Chances are the edges won't be stuck down nice and tight. Instead, grab any flat, sturdy block, cover it in parcel tape to prevent sticking, and apply good, even clamping pressure. Okay, very quick check-in of where we're at right now. Everything was glued up overnight, and I've just got it all out of clamps. The fix on one of the good legs you can hardly see, which is great because we're going to need them. And then the 2 we've laminated together, we've still got the gaps, but what I've done is I've taken a hand plane and I've just made myself one flat surface on them because we're now going to trim them on the table saw. I also have trimmed them to length to match the other ones. When you're making on the fly, one thing you have to be is brutally honest with yourself, because the fact of the matter is you haven't made any plans, you haven't convinced yourself it's going to look good, and then when you finally look at it, you realise your dimensions are completely out. Tabletop's too thin for the thickness of the legs. At the moment, this looks terrible. A couple of things I want to do. I'm going to make the legs smaller. One thing I'll ask you in the comments is, do you think it's too tall? Bit of a daft question, really. I mean, at the time I needed to know this, but this isn't live TV. So, I answered my own question, and I decided to thin the legs down. This made me realise that I don't have a good, safe, if you like, way of doing this on the table saw, meaning there's a good chance that it's a job best suited for a different tool, bandsaw maybe, but I don't have one. So, after some head scratching, I decided to make the cuts in 2 parts. Half from one side, half from the other. That way I could use my G-Ripper. Just remember to flip the piece between cuts with the same face running alongside the fence. And this actually is a very good tip. Hang on to the offcuts because they're going to be the closest you're going to get to a grain match for filling in any blemishes or holes, mortises that are left over. I had a fair bit of practice doing this on this project, but I'm still no expert and I'm not going to show you all of them. But here are the basics as I see them. I use a drill bit to estimate the width of the mortise that needs filling, and then I use the drill bit to set my table saw fence. Kind of like a setup block. Then I cut a strip and shave it down to a nice tight fit. With a bit of fine tuning and hammering, then you can realise that you've only filled half the depth, pretend that that was what you want to do, and then cut another. The first was great practice for doing the final fill and making that better. Here's another tip. It's quite hard to see on this, but if you taper the edges of the last filler block outwardly, that gives you a much tighter fit when you hammer and clamp it into the remaining gap. And now for some more referential measurements. See, my aim is to use the frame of the top as a reference to fit the inner legs of the table inside. You'll see what I mean. I want to have veneered ply on the sides and the back, and then an open front. The ply is going to be held in grooves, not too dissimilar to how the original desk was made. I would show you, but I smashed it up. Anyway, the best way I know to make these grooves is a router table with a stop block. Having the stop block ensures that none of the grooves are going to be longer than the ply that's going to live in them. And the router fence itself is going to ensure that the gap from the groove to the side is constant around each of the legs. Obviously the groove that's left over is going to have a rounded end, but you can fix that with a chisel later. I take 3 passes for this kind of depth just so I don't overstress the bit. And then I'm ready to cut the ply to size. This is another referential measurement, and again I'm going to sneak up on a fit. Because genuinely it just takes a few seconds to shave off a cut on the table saw. I ended up cutting the first panel at least 4 times before I got the fit I wanted. It's far better than accidentally cutting off too much. A quick blurred focus hand planing on the holes we filled, now that the glue is cured. And then we can move on to trimming the trim. I really like this style of solid wood lining the ply, but it doesn't fit in the groove, so it's going to need a little bit of a tweak. And I'm sure with more care I could have managed a better, tighter fit, but for me, this works. Just keep telling yourself that you're not aiming at perfection, and everything will be all right. But honestly, there's never going to be a person that's going to walk into my parents' house and start inspecting the joints on a table that I've made. Well, apart from me. And again, jokes aside, the main aim of this table is that actually it goes unnoticed. Just sits in its corner, hidden away, serving a purpose. And hopefully not looking like a complete eyesore. Now, I have a few more additions before we can call this one done. First is a brace piece across the front. Fortunately, from the desk, one of these tenons was already cut. So I sliced the batten in half, cut it to length, and then made another tenon to match. And then I set about marking the mortises. Now this is important. I'm no hand tool expert, but I do know that good marking and strong knife lines are vital here. So I took my time and I marked the two pieces together. Remember that the placement from one leg to the other actually needs to be a mirror, not identical. And what's brilliant about this method of joinery is as the tenons are inside the profile of the batten itself, it's going to hide a lot of blemishes and small errors once everything's glued together. Brilliant. Now, I could have called this done, but I had an idea. Not something I was 100% sure would actually look very good. Part of me thought the legs were a little bit blocky, so I decided to taper two sides of them. To make it repeatable, I used some double-sided tape to set some blocks to support each leg on the jig. And honestly, I'm not 100% sure I didn't just ruin this project. And I uncovered these screw holes at the bottom of the legs. And honestly, I actually guessed the angle to cut, which didn't come out perfectly, but it was close enough to fix with a bit of sanding. To fix the screw holes, I chiselled them square and then I glued in some blocks, which I don't mind saying did a pretty good job of hiding the fix. Not invisible, but close. I mean, who's going to floor level to check out my work anyway? But overall, I'm still not sure if this is better or worse. But anyway, you tell me, because now it's time to get this glued up and make one or two last minute choices. This is the part where you really find out how square you cut your grooves. And take the time to tape around the joints to help you clean any glue squeeze out. I decided against using too many clamps until I had everything put together. I was finding that the weight of them actually hindered the alignment to start with. If you are a little bit more patient than me, you could actually clamp and leave each section for an hour or so to set and then glue them all together. My only worry with this, and what stopped me doing it, is actually if the overall table is out of square, you don't really have wiggle room to correct the joinery because the glue is already set. I mean, that doesn't make what I'm doing the best way, it just felt slightly more forgiving at the time. But never let it be said that I haven't learnt lessons from past projects. I did do a dry fit before gluing, which did increase my confidence a little bit. And that can only be a good thing. I did have what I think is a reasonably smart idea for me. I laid the tabletop that everything had been built inside upside down, and then I placed the table on top of it. I figured this would give me a better chance of ensuring everything was squared once clamped. And while the glue was curing, I used some of the old drawer runners from the desk, slightly cut down of course, to support the drawer that I was going to add to this table. The little block that I'm clamping to the side is just to ensure that both sides are set at exactly the same height. And CA glue here gives the instant bond while the wood glue cures. This turned out to be a really cheap way to fit a drawer. And then using the referential measurements again, I cut some veneered ply down to size. I opted for rebates on the corners and to hold the base, and then I glued and clamped the drawer box together. Now, big-ish mistake here. See if you can spot it before I tell you. The drawer slides are as simple as you can get really. Two blocks glued to each side of the drawer with the slide running between them. Nothing fancy, but very practical and easy to make. You can actually use the runner itself to set the blocks apart. To ensure the gap was wide enough for the runner to have good movement, I added a few playing cards just to shim it out. Did you spot the mistake? Well, I'll just tell you that the drawer bottom was glued in with the veneer side facing in. That way it looks nicer. I then not only covered the veneer sides with the blocks for the runners, but I also covered the veneered front with a nice veneered face. You don't want the drawer falling out, especially as the top has a slight overhang, and the overhang will mean you'll lose sight of some of the drawer, so I screwed a block into place to stop any accidental overpulls. I didn't show it, but I used some candle wax on the runners, and that's the end of the construction part. I have to say, at this point, I was a little bit shocked. And I know that this is not a tricky build, but there are some parts that may have derailed it. But as soon as I stopped trying to make it perfect, even those bits didn't feel so daunting. I was not in love with the wood tone though, so I decided to darken the entire piece. My hope was that it would even out the different shades and not look too patchy. This wood dye is really easy to apply. Just make sure your workshop is well ventilated. You basically just wipe it on, and then once it's dry, you can apply finish over the top. For that, I reach for my new favourite finish. This is something I brought from Leo over at Hand Eye Craft. He has a YouTube and an Instagram channel, and this is the easiest finish I've used to date. Wipe on, buff off. Couldn't be simpler. And it leaves a lovely satin finish, and it protects the wood. I'll leave a link for it with all of the tools that I've used in this video as well down below in the description. And so we come to the end of the build. I'm not going to lie to you here, I felt a lot of pressure making this. And the daft thing is I shouldn't have. Because the fact is that desk was only ever going to be burnt. It's been sat in a garage for years. And the fact that I could turn some of the wood into something this useful and, frankly, not ugly, I'm going to count that as a victory. Like anything I make, it's got its mistakes. But I try and challenge myself to learn something new in every project. This one? Well, this one was about filling holes, covering blemishes, trying to disguise wood that was already pretty damaged, and trying to get the most out of something that in reality is free. I really hope that you've enjoyed the process. If you like this kind of video, please let me know in the comments and we'll try and do a few more. If you've got some scrap wood lying at home, or if you're walking down the street and see some discarded furniture, have a look to see if there's any solid wood that you can take out of it, because you might be able to turn it into something useful too. Thank you so much for watching. If you like builds like this, I've put a few more up there for you. And if you decide to click on them and watch them, thank you again, and I'll see you over there.